background. The reason why we normally use the background color is just to be able to swap between the foreground and background color. So there's an arrow here, and if you have like two colors that you're using a lot on your web layout, you can set it for your foreground color and your background color, and you can swap between them by clicking this arrow. You guys know what I'm talking about? And then the hex codes that we've been using a lot in CSS are actually, you can actually read them off of Photoshop. So you can just drag these around, get the color you want, and then in the bottom left here, next to the pound sign, that's actually the code that you put into your CSS layout. So that's where we always get the codes when we're doing web design. So let's look a little at modifying existing images really quickly. So to resize the image, you just go to image size. And I know a number of you guys are having trouble just sizing kind of the width, leaving the height alone. What you want to do is just uncheck constraint proportions. And constraint proportion just means that if you scale it, it's going to scale it, it's going to maintain the aspect ratio on your image. So if you uncheck it, it'll let you scale the width and the height independently. And then you just hit OK to apply the image size. And image cropping, that's what you guys were doing in the first part of the lab. It just lets you take a larger image, select a portion to focus on, and it'll just give you that portion of the image, and you can just save that separately. And hue and saturation. So this is just nice to kind of fiddle with the color of your image. You can change the intensity of the colors, the brightness, and you can actually slide over the entire color range. So you can kind of make your blues into greens, and I mean, just slide around the hue and you'll see what I mean. This is just if you have an image or a like a photograph, and you want to just play with the colors a little bit, mess around with it, get some funky effects. You can use this panel, and it's under the image adjustments hue saturation bar. And so if you had an image like this, you can mess with the hue and saturation, and you can just make it green or whatever. If you click colorize, it'll take all the colors in your original image. So if you click this behind it, it'll take all your colors here, and it'll make it some variation of the color you choose. So we chose green here, and it gives it that kind of sepia tone, except it's green. And levels is the next panel that you're going to be using quite a bit. Image adjustments levels. And what it lets you do is it lets you set the highlight, the midtone, and the shadows in your image. So you can kind of accentuate details or hide them by manipulating the highlights and things. So you just mess with the highlights a little bit to bring out more of the image. Just like this. So the first thing is Photoshop. There's no like science to this, and there's not too much science to, I guess, web design too. There is to like what's right code and what's wrong code. But if you have a layout and you're going to go build that layout, you have a lot of freedom in how you're going to go about building that. With Photoshop, it's kind of the same thing. Every image is going to be a little bit different. So, under levels, under hue saturation, we can't just tell you, bump this value by 5 units or whatever. You're just going to experiment with it until it looks right. And then, okay, so this is actually a really important panel. It's blending options. And the way you access this is on your layer. You right-click it, and you can go to blending options, and it'll pop up this panel. And this panel has all kinds of nice features. And it lets you apply like drop shadows, inner shadow, outer glow, inner glow, bevel, color overlay, grade overlay, and stroke. This is the single most important panel for web design, I think. I use this panel on I use it on every project, and I use it on almost every single layer. So it's the best, it's the best panel to really, get used to. And you can apply all these neat effects with really minimal effort. So I definitely check this out. I think this comes into play in the second tutorial too, so you guys should see it. But I would mess around with it on your own free time too. You'll definitely find yourself using it a lot. All right, and just wrapping up. So some important panels are the history panel on the right-hand side. And what history lets you do is, instead of undo, where it only lets you step back one change, history is going to log all the different changes you do to your document up to a certain point, and you can just undo whatever you've done. If you want to make the histories longer, you can actually do that in your settings. I think by default it's only maybe like 20 entries, you can make it 100 or 200 or 50 or whatever you need to. I had this set quite high. And the layers panel, the way layers work, it's kind of suggested by its name. So if you create new layers, layers on top, objects and layers on top of lower layers are going to appear on top of them. So they stack according to the layers here. And it's nice to be able to isolate your different things. Does that make sense? When I say that it stacks? Like if you have, right, if you have two objects and two layers, the one on the bottom is going to appear under it, and you can just rearrange it via this panel. In this panel, you can also change the opacity of the layer, and you can hide and show the layer by clicking and unclicking the eye. And to create a new layer, you can just do it here. And to delete a layer, you just drag the layer into the trash can, and you can actually create folders to organize your layers.
So like when you're talking about highlighting, would that be, could you do like highlight for a certain part of the image in a certain layer? And then,
What can you say?
like when you were saying messing with like the different hues and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
Can that be dictated like a certain part of the image based on the layer?
Yeah, so with the hue saturations or levels or anything, you can either select a sub-portion of your layer with the select tools, or you can apply it to the whole layer. Yeah, so you could do both. Some of those things, yeah, you normally can do both. Are there any other questions? I know I'm going through this quick, but it's more preference.
Sorry, do you just use groups to just purely for organizational purposes, or like what happens to the layers in the different groups?
Yeah, so it's purely organization, as far as I know. It just lets you associate them together, just clean up. Because like when you're working on a larger project, you might have 50, 60 layers as well. Yeah, that's just. Okay, so creating content. So the way that you're basically going to draw shapes in Photoshop is normally you're going to use the selection tool, either the rectangle tool or the circular marquee tool, and then you're just going to, after you've selected it, you're just going to fill it with the color. So here are the tools. Beyond that, you're going to do maybe text and formatting, and there's a text tool in the toolbar, and then if you have your workspace set up correctly, you can just click this button and you can set all your fonts in here. There's some nice features for kind of the horizontal and the vertical scale of your text, as well as spacing between different lines and spacing between characters that you might like. And you can force all capitals or small caps also, and subscript, superscript, things like that. I mean, the panels are pretty self-explanatory. And the paintbrush. So, one important thing is, if you look at the Photoshop toolbar, a lot of these icons will have a little arrow in the bottom right-hand side. And what that means is if you click and hold that tool, there's going to be kind of related tools that are also grouped under there, and you can select the ones that you need. So, for example, like the brush tool is grouped with the pencil tool, so it's going to be hidden. The pencil tool will be hidden unless you held that down and selected it. And for each of these drawing tools here in the top left-hand corner of your screen, there's just going to be settings for the size of the brush and the hardness. The hardness is how clear your edge is. So if you set this to a lower value, that's going to mean that the edge of your dot that you drew is going to be kind of blurry. And that's nice if you're just kind of doing like fading effects, or if you're doing like highlighting, if you're trying to draw on highlights manually. You can do a hard, like if you set it all the way hard, then it's going to be super defined edges, and that's nice for these crisp lines. And the paint bucket tool. Paint bucket is hidden with the gradient tool also, and it just lets you fill a selection that you have, or you can fill the entire layer without selecting it first. The drawing a basic shape. So here's just an example of drawing a basic shape. You can do it two ways. You can either use the select tool, make a selection, and then fill it, or you can use the rectangle tools down here too. If you're going to use these rectangle tools here though, the rectangle tool or the ellipse tool or the polygon, any of these, make sure that you check this option, the top left corner. And what this does is it's going to make it fill the image that the shape that you drew, instead of doing some weird masking thing. If you don't set this, it's going to use some mask, and it's just going to be really hard to manipulate. If you set the fill layer, it's just going to make the most basic shape that you can in Photoshop, and it'll just be more understandable to you until you get kind of more advanced with Photoshop, and manipulating it will be more intuitive. So just make sure you select this. Otherwise, Photoshop will kind of create this like weird mask shape, which I don't really even understand right now. And that's it. So I know we went through that really quickly. I just wanted to go over the slides with you guys, and then if you have time at home, go through the slides again, play with the tools, or go through tutorials, and you'll probably learn Photoshop that way, just doing projects.